welcome back. If you have never seen one of my videos, hi, my name is Ashley. But for today, we're gonna start with photography basics. If you do not know, I am a professional photographer. I have been for 10 years now. It is my daily job. I love it so much. It brings me so much joy. And I just wanted to share some of my expertise with you for people who either want to just take great pictures of their kids, or if you are a photographer wanting to learn more, if you're just starting a business, anyone who's interested in learning more about photography. I'm gonna be doing a lot of videos coming soon, photography related. Okay. Today, we're gonna get into the basics. I have held a few different photography classes where I teach people how to use their cameras and their settings, and I figured this would be a wonderful way of doing that, where you can watch the video over and over till you get it. Photography 101. This is gonna be a video about shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. So these are the three main settings in your camera if you're wanting to learn how to shoot manually. I'm gonna teach you today. It can be a little confusing and a little complex at first if you are new to what these are and what they do, but once you get them down, once you understand their purpose, you can get the photo that you want, you can get the look that you want, the exposure that you want so quickly. It's amazing to have this control. If you're used to shooting on auto or you're used to shooting in aperture priority mode, this just allows you so much more freedom. Once you get this, wrap your head around it. So let's dive into it. I'm gonna be putting in some sample photos, kind of trying to explain and show you what these different things do and what they mean. We're gonna start with shutter speed. What is shutter speed? It's exactly as it sounds. It is the speed that your shutter goes when capturing your photo. I'm just going to explain it the way my husband did when I was getting into this. So imagine two curtains. So my face is the sensor. You have curtain 1 and curtain 2, okay? So the point where you can see my face is when light is let into your camera sensor, which is my face, to capture a photo. So if the shutter speed is like, or like it's so fast, it's just getting a little sliver, that is a fast shutter speed. If it's slow, it's like this. What does the shutter speed do when taking a photo? One, it lets in light. So the longer your shutter speed is, the more light it's going to let in. Sometimes if it's really dark, you need to let in more light. But if it's too slow, then you don't capture the motion. So your shutter speed lets in light and captures motion. You are trying to get a picture of somebody jumping in the air and you want a crisp, clean, no blurry picture, you need to have a very fast shutter speed. But when that happens, you're not letting in as much light. So then what do? We get into the other settings. But I want you to understand what it is the shutter speed is doing and why you need to have it at a certain speed. So if I'm photographing a family or kids or senior, I try to keep my shutter speed at 1/200. 1/200th of a second. I like to keep it around there. Sometimes I do go a little bit lower if it is a posed still shot and I need more light and don't want to bump up my ISO, which we're going to get into again. But if you're capturing somebody jumping, somebody running, somebody doing something fast, you're going to need a faster shutter speed. Going in the other direction, why do you need a slow shutter speed? Well, again, to let in more light or to capture really cool photos like this one here. This is a photo I took at a wedding, and this was like a 30-second shutter speed. So push the button on the camera, it's dark outside. I had a sparkler and I walked around this couple and it's just capturing that light. And then I had a flash that would go off and light the couple up. So you can get really cool effects using a long shutter speed. But again, knowing what this does is very important to get the type of photo that you want. That's kind of an overview of shutter speed. We may come back to that a little more detail, but now we're gonna go to ISO. This one's pretty plain and simple. ISO is basically just, in terms to make it easy to understand, the sensitivity to light that your sensor has. So if you have it at ISO 100, it has less sensitivity to the light that is let in through that shutter. If your photo is too dark, and you can't lower your shutter speed anymore because you need it to capture something, or like you don't want any, if your shutter speed gets to too low, then even the motion from your hand holding the camera will cause blur. You can bump up your ISO to help brighten up your photos. Now, why wouldn't I always just have my ISO up really high, my shutter speed up really high? ISO, the higher you go, the more you risk getting noise in your photo. Now, I know that sounds like a weird term when you've never heard it, because why would a photo make noise? Here's an example right here of what noise is in photo. It's basically a graininess, looks like little dots. It's not smooth. So depending on the camera you're using, the quality of it, the brand, the everything will depend on how your camera handles high ISOs, handles that noise. So some of the newer cameras can go a really high ISO before there's any noticeable noise. That being said, I keep my ISO as low as I can when I can. So I keep it at 100 unless I need more light when I can't reduce my shutter speed anymore. There are situations when, say you're taking photos at sunset and the light's just going down and down, you need to keep your shutter speed and aperture where it is, bump up the ISO. I try not to go over 800 when I'm shooting, but again, that's just with my camera and what I'm comfortable with, what I feel will still look good. Okay, now we're gonna get to the most confusing to wrap your head around is the aperture, which is also called f-stop. Aperture is a lens thing. So we've been talking about the body of the camera, the shutter speed and the ISO has to do with the body of the camera you have. The aperture has to do with the lens. The aperture is basically the size of the hole that's letting in light through your lens. So there are blades in your lens that form a circle and they will close up and expand based on the aperture. With me so far? Okay, so again, it's all about how much light you're letting into your camera. If your aperture is open like this, you're going to let more light in your camera. So therefore, your shutter speed can be faster, ISO can be lower, all these things. Then if your aperture is small, you're gonna let in less light. So what does that mean? Right, Lincoln, we need a slower shutter speed, higher ISO to properly expose the photo. Once you understand, again, the size of the opening, that's the easy part. The next part of the aperture, it doesn't only let in a certain amount of light, but it controls the depth of field in your photo. We're gonna go in depth about depth of field in just a second, but let's go over the numbers. So an f2.0 is a wide open aperture. So it kind of is backwards. I don't know why it's this way, but a smaller number is a bigger opening. F22 is a tiny, tiny, tiny little hole. So again, F2, a lot of light. F22, little bit of light coming through. Make sense? Okay, so you ask, why wouldn't you just always have it open as much as you can to let in all the light? The opening of the aperture blades also determines your depth of field. So if you have an F2, your aperture, F2, big old opening. That creates a very shallow depth of field. So we're gonna picture a photo. I'm gonna be inserting photos so you can visually see this a little bit better, but say this is your, we're gonna go this way. Okay, this is the camera. You're the camera, I am the subject, this is the background, okay? The depth of field is the point of where the focus is in your photo. So, if you have an f2 and you focus on my eyes, the depth of field will be very, very small. So if I move a little bit, I am out of focus, which is what's happening here. This is a good example. I have mine on f4.5 right now. If I am back here, I am blurry. If I am up here, I am blurry. I have to stay within this certain depth of field, and the bigger I make that opening, the smaller that depth of field is. You with me? I'm trying to explain this where it makes sense. So if I were to set my camera on f22 where all of this would be in focus, it would be very, very dark. And I would have to bump up the ISO even more. Make sense? Okay, so this first photo is a large f-stop, so a small number, large f-stop, so the depth of field is very shallow, which makes the background in the photo blurry. So you see these photos where you got this gorgeous, creamy, blurry background, which is called bokeh, by the way, which we will talk about in another video because we're not getting there. And then in the second photo, I have the f-stop closed down more. So it's a higher number, smaller f-stop, but you will see more of the background in focus. So what does aperture do? Or f-stop, same thing. What does it do? It lets in light, determines, the size of the hole determines how much light is let in, but it also controls your depth of field, how blurry your background is, how much is in focus. So moving this into a real world scenario, say I'm taking pictures of a family, okay? I do individuals of all the kids normally, and then I take the group photos. If I'm taking a picture of an individual person, I will normally put my f-stop as low, which means as big as I can, to have a shallow depth of field where I have a beautiful blurry background. If I add more people into this photo, say I have a family of 4, focusing on the person in the middle. So on my camera, I've got my little focus point on that face. There are other faces here. If somebody is slightly in front, slightly behind, if they're not in this exact plane right here, this plane of view, then they're gonna be blurry. I need to have an f-stop number that is bigger, so making the hole smaller, the f-stop number is bigger to include more in my plane, my depth of field plane of focus. So the background may not get as blurry. It depends on how far they are from the background, which I'm gonna go into, again, I wanna do a whole video on depth of field because there's so much to talk about. But anyways, so if I'm photographing a family, I normally don't go under f4.0 because I want to make sure all the faces are in focus. You could keep going up to f8, f11, but then your background loses the blur and you lose light in that photo, so you've got to compensate with your ISO and whatnot. Does any of this make sense so far? I hope I'm explaining this. It took me several different ways of hearing it to kind of get everything. So I think what I'm gonna do is, after I have this talking through style right here, I'm gonna actually show you on a photo shoot some of these applications. Okay, so shutter speed controls light and captures captures motion. Your ISO is a sensitivity to light, but can lead to noise in your photo. And then your aperture determines how much light is let in and determines your depth of field. The lens that you are using determines what your aperture can be. ISO and shutter speed are things that are in the body of the camera. Aperture is determined by the lens that you're using. So I like to use prime lenses, and prime lenses are ones that don't zoom in and out. They are a constant focal, so like a 50mm lens. I love my 100mm lens, but those lenses, it will say on the lens f whatever to f whatever. So if you have a lens that starts at f4, you can't go down to f2. Okay, and they get more expensive to get the smaller f-stop numbers. Like this lens that I'm using right now goes down to f4. It is a zoom lens. What is this one? So this is a 24-105 f4. So that's the basics of manual settings. I'm gonna go ahead and insert a little, what do I do if you were here in person with me and we were out on a shoot, kind of showing you how I would assess what my camera settings need to be. Because it's all well and good telling you what they do, but I want to show you how I look at a scenario and determine what settings that specific location needs. Let's go ahead and get in to that part. So we are out in a wooded area. The sun is behind the subject, which hopefully the subject will be Lincoln if he will cooperate. So Kylie's gonna film me taking pictures. I'm gonna show you the process of what I do when I get to a spot to figure out what my settings need to be and why the settings are what they are, okay? All right, so my camera's on. It is a very sunny day. There are no clouds. It is middle of the day right now. So we are next to some trees, but it is still very, very bright. So when I get to a situation like this, my first thought is, what do I want this picture to look like? Do I want a very, very blurry background? What is my subject? Lincoln, come here, sweetie. So my current settings on my camera are 1/200th of a second shutter speed, f4.0, and ISO 200. That's just what my camera's on. I'm gonna take a test shot real quick. Hey. Okay, so this is what it looks like. I'm gonna put it up on the screen, but you can come in if you want. It is a little bit dark in this spot, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna move my f-stop to 2.8, and Lincoln, it'd be great if you were right there. Yeah! All right, so this for me is a pretty properly exposed photo. Depending on your taste, it could be too bright, but this is the level of brightness that I like. And I'm gonna put, the photos I'm gonna insert in the video here are gonna be unedited, so they're gonna be as I took them. That makes sense. So that was before, a little bit dark. I changed from f4 to f2.8. So that is how I decided to lighten the picture. I'm gonna put it back at f4. So what's another way I could lighten the picture? Well, my shutter speed is at 1/200th of a second. So I really shouldn't lower that because I am photographing a toddler. He's moving. So my only other option is to bump up my ISO. So I'm gonna bump up my ISO to, let's go to 300. Come here, or 320. Come here, sweetie. And happy face. All right, so this is what it is at ISO 320. So it brightened it up almost as much as the f-stop change, but you learn to figure out what it is you want in a photo and how you can adjust your settings to make that happen. Does that make sense? Say I want to get a shot right here, but I want it to be super, super blurry. This is a 50mm lens, and the f-stop that this lens can go down to is 1.4. So I'm gonna put it down to 1.4. Now, if you remember, the aperture, we can stand up for a second. The aperture, which is also the f-stop, again, if I go down to 1.4, which is a big opening, lets in a lot of light, the depth of field is gonna be very, very small, okay? So it's gonna create a beautiful blurry background, but you also have to make sure that you're paying attention to where that focus point is, because if you focus on the nose, the eyes will be blurry. It's that small. It also depends on how close you are to your subject. I'm going to talk more about this in another video because there's so much to know about depth of field, but it depends on how close you are to the background, how close the camera is to the subject, what lens you're using, all that stuff. But for now, f-stop. The small number, you have a tiny little depth of field. So I put it at f1.4. So that means I'm going to bump my ISO down to 100. Okay? I may need to up my shutter speed, but let's take a test shot and see what this looks like. Yep, rub your eyes. So this is what I expected to happen. Since my f-stop went from 4.0 all the way down to 1.4, I'm letting in a lot more light. So this picture is very, very bright. So my ISO is 100, f-stop 1.4. I'm gonna bump up my shutter speed to 400, over 400. And let's see what that does. That's better. Look at that boy. So that is a much more properly exposed photo. It could be still a touch bright. Oh, he's so cute. But if you will notice, the background is so beautifully blurry. So if I don't want it quite that bright, I'm gonna bump it up shutter of 1/500th of a second. Hey, come back over here. Whee! And happy baby! That's about where I would want it. Oh, that's so cute. We're gonna go to one more spot to assess the situation. Maybe put it in a spot where he's in the sunlight, which I wouldn't typically recommend for putting bright full sun on somebody's face, but I want to show you how you would adjust your settings because it's going to be much brighter. So we're going to go find another spot. Okay, so if you see right now, Lincoln is in full sun. It's middle of the day. The sun is right on him. So right off the bat, my settings are going to have to be drastically different than they were before. So I'm going to take a shot from where I was at. 1.4 f-stop, 1/500 shutter speed, ISO 100. There we go. Okay, so as you can tell from this photo, it's almost completely white. So we're going to need, if I want to keep that f-stop at 1.4, we're going to need a lot faster shutter speed. Let's go to 1/16 of a hundredth over 1600. That's the word.
Now he's doing
1600, and I'm going to take a test shot here. Lincoln, hey, I need your face. Okay, so we got the back of him. It is still insanely bright. Whew. That sun is bright because again, he's in full sun. It's like 1 or 2 o'clock. Again, if I want to keep that 1.4, I'm just gonna have to keep bumping up the shutter. Yes. So to keep it at that 1.4, I need to be at 1/5000th of a second to get a properly exposed photo. But what I would do in this situation, he's really far from the background, so I'm gonna bump up my f-stop to 4.0. Change my aperture to 4.0, and I'm gonna bump my shutter back down to about 1/1600. Come over here. Yeah, you're smiling, but I need you to smile in the sun. Can you smile in the sun? Okay, that is a little bit dark, so we're gonna bump it to 800. There we go. So f-stop 4.0, shutter speed is 1/800, and ISO is 100. But I want you to notice in these two different photos, the f-stop 1.4 and the f-stop 4, I want you to notice the difference in the background. It's actually quite incredible how much more detail is in the background for the f4. Say I wanted to make the background even more in focus. I'm gonna bump this to f8, which I rarely do. Okay, so Lincoln fell down, so he's done with pictures. But the last shot that I took is actually him crying dirt on his face, but it works. So my settings were 1/250 for shutter speed, f8.0, and ISO 100. This is a beautifully exposed photo for being in that full sun. So in the full sunlight, an f8 can be very, very handy. So I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up here, but I hope that these few examples help make you understand the relationship between these three settings and what they do and why you change which one. So the next video, I'm gonna go more in depth about different sections, but this was just an overview, beginning point for you to learn how to use your settings, how to shoot in manual, and how to take control of your photos. All right, guys, so I hope this was helpful. I hope that it was understandable. I try to explain things where it's easy to grasp. And if you have any requests for any more photography related videos, please leave them in the comments below. I have so many ideas for things that I want to do. That is gonna be it for this one. I guess I will see you guys next time. Bye. Face. Anyways, 50. We're gonna talk about focal lengths in another video. I keep saying that. There's so much I want to share with y'all, y'all. Shutter speed. I'm gonna be doing many video. I have taught a few different. I can't talk anymore. Draw a picture for you? No, let's not do that. Okay, I'm gonna insert a clip here of more of a. Talking to you.
What happened?
They just threw dirt. It just stuck to my lip gloss. Stop it.